So one of the things that we're trying to do is help raise awareness as some of these projects are proposed in Minnesota for the very first time to help citizens understand and be informed in the debate and the conversation about whether this should take place in the state, how it should take place in the state, where it should take place in the state. There are several proposals right now that are moving along. You'll hear references made to those. One of those is, the first one in the pipeline is called Polynet. It's not in the watershed of the wilderness. It is in the Lake Superior watershed. The other projects that are right behind it are actually very close to the wilderness and are waters that flow, the watershed that flows into the wilderness itself. A couple of clarifying remarks. Here, an individual talking about the Upper Blackfoot River in Montana, and he talks about how that is the effects on that river from past sulfide mining operations, and that was true that that river was severely contaminated. Most of the lower reaches of the Upper Blackfoot are now, my understanding, are mostly cleaned up, but there are still tributaries that still experience significant water pollution problems from those past mines. So he's referring to those upper reaches of the Upper Blackfoot. Obviously, each project by itself is independently evaluated. But because we've never had this kind of mining done in Minnesota before, how Polynet gets handled, the first one, sort of sets a template for how other projects will be handled. Everybody acknowledges that. But they hit a little snag, and that is the EPA. The US EPA weighed in with their comments as well. And they gave this, they have a little bit of a different status with regards to these kinds of projects that have implications for fulfilling the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. And what the EPA did was they give these projects a ranking, and they gave it something they call an EU3, environmentally unsatisfactory level 3 ranking, which is a failing grade. It is the lowest possible grade that they could give a project like this. And it is given, since 1987, they have given this score out less than 1% of the time. So industry and the DNR are portraying this as if this is just business as usual, but they've really hit a big bump with this. And the EPA is saying, we believe that there are deficiencies significant enough that you now should do a supplemental draft EIS and reissue for public comment. We don't know if the DNR is going to do that. It's actually DNR and the Army Corps of Engineers are both responsible governing units on this. And we don't know if they're going to do that. They're now in the stage where they're starting to have those conversations with the EPA about what they will do. The EPA has been telling them of these deficiencies for months and months and years as this project has moved forward. This should not have been a surprise to the responsible governing units. I think they didn't expect the EPA to flex its authority in the way that it did, because for so many years it has not.
But does the EPA have any authority to stop it?
In a way, yes. Okay, so here's what they can do next. Say they fail to reach, what the EPA's goal is to find solutions across this impasse. And if they feel that the Army Corps and the DNR respond sufficiently to those, then the project moves forward. If they feel that they haven't responded sufficiently, they can refer this project to the executive branch's Council on Environmental Quality. This is a branch out of the White House. And all of this creates further delay for this. So there could be, at the minimum, delays. The EPA also has the authority to override any permits that a state may issue under the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. Again, rarely exercised by the EPA, but within their authority. So if they feel like they are not, if the state proceeds and go ahead and permits these mines, Polynet, and the EPA and the Council on Environmental Quality disagree with this, the EPA can veto those permits. So Polynet is sort of in this EIS process. Public comments have closed officially, but there's certainly opportunities for the public to still weigh in. Behind it, though, are a bunch of other projects that are now feel like they have the green light to proceed ahead as well. And in particular, these projects are all centered just south of Ely, So there's a great deal of momentum now that's building for these projects. In particular, I think they probably want to make use of Polynet's processing facility to process their ore as well. They're not saying this, but that's what most people believe is going to happen. And so this is a very critical time for public opinion and discourse and conversations with elected officials at all levels, both at the state level and our federally elected officials, is an extremely valuable time to start weighing in before decisions are made.
So I have several questions about how these impacts come about. There's open pit mining, there's underground mining. They're going to take this rock, I assume, someplace, crush it up to get the precious minerals out. And we heard the one guy say that
the sulfur's all removed.
They're going to take out all the sulfides and take care of them. Now, is the problem? There must be some problem with the open pit mine draining into the groundwater, I'm assuming. But then I'm guessing from what I've been hearing that maybe the major problem is what they do with the leftovers, the so-called tailings. We also hear about wetlands being destroyed. Can you explain all of that?
Yeah, so let me sort of walk you visually, mentally through what they do. For the open pit mining, they obviously big holes, hundreds of acres in size. And they excavate like enormous waste rock piles. You heard 500 football fields, 20 stories high. And there's many leftovers. One of the leftovers are these waste rock piles that they figure out don't contain enough ore to make it worth them sending off to processing. 99% is not processed. These waste rock piles, for the most part, stay on the surface forever. So 500 football fields, 20 stories high, on the surface of Minnesota's land.
Where?
Forever. Right around the mines, right around the pit site. Now, Polynet proposes to put some of the waste rock back into one of the, or sort of there's a combination of sort of 2.5 pits that they'll refill and create a creative wetland, is their plan. The other pit they're not going to refill, but you'll still end up with like gargantuan mountains of waste rock. The sulfur is all still in the waste rock. When they talk about removing the sulfur, they're talking about the 1% that goes off to the processing plant. And the processing plant crushes it up into a fine powder. They do a variety of chemical processes to it. They have a high-pressure cooker, almost just like a pressure cooker that sort of cooks it down, and they end up with a concentrate. The concentrate is what they're actually going to be selling, this metal concentrate that they will, and you hear legislators talk about these great manufacturing jobs that are going to come from this. This is all concentrate that's being shipped out to other countries to feed the global market. This is not being turned into finished products in Minnesota. There are, from the processing facility, there are waste materials that are generated from that, highly toxic waste materials. Those are what we call tailings. And those go into a big tailings basin.
Where?
Right next to the plant as well. And the tailings basin, maybe they've removed most of the sulfur in the process there, but remember all that waste rock still sitting there with sulfur content that is generating acid mine drainage anytime it comes into contact with air and water. Whether you do an open pit mine or you do a subsurface mine, you still end up with waste rock piles left over on the surface. Even after you've stuffed some of it back in the hole or the pit, you still have some that's left on forever. That has to be covered and monitored because the acid generating potential can be thousands of years. In fact, the Polynet Draft EIS predicts, this is nothing I'm making up, their own predictions, is that there will be water quality problems, heavy metal contaminants that leach off those waste rock piles for as much as 2,000 years.